thank you for joining us as we continue this Christmas journey during this beautiful season. Joining us again is Father Greg Labus, Director of Liturgy for the Diocese of Brownsville and pastor of St. Joseph Church in Edinburgh, Texas. Thank you, Father, for joining us again. Another beautiful feast to talk about today, the Feast of the Holy Family.
Yes, Brenda, it's always a pleasure to reflect and share a lot of insights about the great feasts of the Church. As you mentioned, we're reflecting on the Feast of the Holy Family. And the Holy Family falls within the octave of Christmas. That day, it's usually whatever Sunday, the Sunday between Christmas and the solemnity of Mary, Mother of God. That Sunday is dedicated to the Holy Family. The model for us, really, in many ways, of what families should be.
Well, and so many times we think, well, we already just celebrated the Nativity, and Mary and Joseph are very present there, but now we get to focus on Mary and Joseph and their family. Yeah,
in a little bit more larger way, to not only to focus on Mary and Joseph, but also on the Lord himself, because he was integral to that family, obviously. Where Christmas, we're just focusing primarily on his birth. Now it's the relationships between Jesus and Joseph, and Jesus and Mary, Mary and Joseph. So it's focusing on the relationships that they have with each other. And it's a way for us to reflect also on the relationships that we share within our families.
Well, because they're the ideal role model of a family. Not to say that they didn't, have some struggles just as all families have, but they are definitely a model to try to emulate.
Absolutely, a model of respect and love, which sometimes we don't see that in our families in modern society. So, families are undergoing a lot of pressures, even to the point that where some are trying to maybe redefine what a family is. But I think when we look at the Holy Family of Joseph, Mary, and Jesus, it's a reminder to us that family of a mother and a father and children are where the Church is in a more concentrated form, the domestic church, where children learn about God, where children learn to love one another, where children learn to respect one another. And obviously that has to go on between husbands and wives also.
Right, everyone has a role to play, an integral role, and we learn from each of those roles. I mean, that of a mother, that of a father, and that of the child.
Right, and so many times unfortunately, we see, and I think in our society, where children, some roles seem to be wanting to be reversed, which some might say that's a good thing. I don't think personally it's a good thing when children have the upper hand in a family and they can take on the responsibilities and roles of parents, and where they kind of rule the roost, so to speak.
We've talked about this, about how parents sometimes want to be friends to their children.
Right, and I think that's a dangerous road to go down when parents will want to be friends with their children. We're reminded on this Feast of the Holy Family, and we hear it in the Scriptures, that Jesus was obedient to his father and mother, to Joseph and Mary. He did what they asked of him. And I think it's important that in our modern society that we help children understand that they are just that. They are children. They need guidance. They need discipline. They need to be fostered and guided and cared for. And that's the role of a mother and father, to be parents. I challenge parents when they come in asking for baptism for their children. I challenge them to be parents. Don't be their friend. You can be friends with your children when they're 40 years old. But when they're children, when they're developing, they need your love and support and guidance. And sometimes that means discipline.
And you were talking about the concept of obedience as a child. And as you said that, I was reflecting on us as children of God being obedient to our Father.
Exactly. We are all children of the Father through our baptism. And so we're called to be obedient to the Father. And that's reflected in the Holy Family, and certainly reflected in our own domestic families, that children are called to be obedient to their parents and to respect their parents. This is another, I think, contemporary issue that is, we can find guidance through the Holy Family of how children should respect their parents, because that's what Jesus did. He respected his mother and father, Mary and Joseph, and he was obedient unto them, as the scriptures say. So it's a huge issue and I know I can think that parents oftentimes, they want to give their children the best, and that's a good thing. They want to do the best for their children. However, that means sometimes that you cannot, don't give in to the temptation of trying to be their friend. Right.
Let's talk a little bit about families and the struggles in today's modern world. And I know that sometimes, I'm sure that Joseph and Mary had struggles as well.
They did, and obviously when Jesus was born, when Joseph had to find a place for Mary, he struggled to find housing when she was about to give birth. And of course contemporary families do have a lot of struggles. They have financial struggles. They have struggles with making sure that their children get educated. They have struggles with providing for their children. That's a concern for many families. I think perhaps many families, they perhaps do not concentrate on what's most important. I think the temptation that many give into is to have a lot of material things. That's a huge temptation, especially in Western societies. We think we need to have 5 cars. We need to have a house with 20 rooms. There needs to be a television in every room. Really? I don't think so. I think we have lost sight of what's really most important. And I can reflect on my own growing up in my family. While we were not really, really poor, we weren't rich either. We had a home to live in. My father provided for us. My mother, she took care of us. That was her main goal, was to make sure that all of us were taken care of, because my father worked, Mom took care of the home. Some of my fondest memories growing up were not that we had a television in every room. We had a little black and white television. That's what we had.
That everyone shared.
We didn't have air conditioning either. Unbelievable these days that we didn't have air. But we were content. We were happy. I can even remember in school we didn't have air conditioning. But my fondest memories are when my father would bring home a watermelon in the late spring, and we would sit outside eating watermelon, and we would stay until it got dark outside, and we would talk about the stars, the constellations. I think a lot of people have gotten away from the idea of just visiting. Mm-hmm. Everybody's got some kind of earphones going on. Everybody's isolated. And those relationships are breaking down of interaction with one another. So I think there's a lot of difficulties that modern families face, that we can look to the Holy Family for as a model for us to emulate. Certainly, hard work was not unknown to Joseph. And he taught Jesus a trade. Jesus shared in Joseph's trade as a carpenter. Mary certainly worked I can only imagine she must have worked very hard in the home to prepare meals, to take care of Joseph and Jesus. But it's because there was a relationship. We see that breaking down, I think, in contemporary society. I can only remember watching a family come into a restaurant. They were sitting close to each other, but they may as well have been one on Mars, one on the moon, and one somewhere else.
Because they weren't interacting.
They were not interacting. They were totally disconnected from each other because one had the listening to music, another one was on the phone, and this one was looking at the iPad. While they were physically close to each other, they were as distant as they could possibly be. And I don't think that's the way the family of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph was.
I can't imagine Jesus being on his iPhone or some electronic gadget.
There was interaction, there was a relationship, and continuing to develop those relationships. And so the obedience that Jesus brought and the respect that Jesus brought to Joseph and Mary, that's something I think that we're losing in contemporary society. And I think it would be good for all of us to step back and reevaluate how much has modern technology really broken down family life, and perhaps is unintentionally is separating us. Instead of bringing us closer together, it's dividing us.
Right. And so that the domestic church, I mean, the environment that's created by the mother and the father for the children, and even our faith is imparted to us in the domestic church.
It's in the domestic church that we learn about God. It's where we learn our prayers. It's where we learn to love God and our neighbor. It's where we learn the commandments.
Right.
And if that falls apart, then where is it going to happen? I think we're seeing the symptoms of this right now in contemporary society, even to the point where maybe we're wanting even to redefine what a family is. Is it two men and an adopted child? Is it two women and an adopted child? That's where the debates are right now, and the difficulties that is causing for our society in general.
Church for years has talked about family life and the domestic church and the importance of family.
And the church is always concerned, and especially in this day and age, the church is expressing the concern for supporting family, or what some would call traditional families, because when that disintegrates, society at large begins to disintegrate, because it is the primary building block of society, is a family but we're talking about a family of a father and a mother and children. And when we redefine these relationships and it becomes something else, society cannot continue going down the same path. It's going to either change or it's going to disintegrate.
So it's so important during this Christmas season to reflect on the Holy Family. So this, again, we've talked about how the liturgy the church in her wisdom provides us these opportunities as reminders. To remind us,
especially to remind us of the importance of the relationships that we develop in families. And we can think a few years back where families were much larger than they are now. Maybe there would have been 4 or 5 siblings, whereas now maybe there's 1 or 2, maybe none, no children at all. And I think this is sad in many ways, especially for children that are alone for whatever reason, because it's that interaction and those relationships that are developed between brothers and sisters that help us to grow into our lives as adults in society. And it helps us to mature, where I think as we don't have that, perhaps these are the roots of a lot of the problems we experience in contemporary society.
Well, we talked about the challenges, especially here in today's modern world. We have now growing numbers of divorces, and single people who are discerning the marriage vocation, because marriage is a vocation as well. And so, I mean, some real challenges in those areas as well. I mean, those single young adults who are not married yet and are maybe looking to the Holy Family as an example, as they consider the sacrament.
Yes, that to look to the Holy Family, because it's there we see the the fidelity that is so important in married life, fidelity. And many times that becomes, in our society, it's become almost a bad word, fidelity. But marriage has, and the love between a husband and a wife has to reflect fidelity, because as St. Paul reminds us, the love between a husband and a wife is a reflection of the love Christ has for us, his church. Him being the bridegroom, his church, his bride. And so married love reflects that relationship. And Christ is always faithful to us. And that's why fidelity has to be part of married love, and consequently the building of a family. There has to be that fidelity. And unfortunately, fidelity is not a prized virtue in our culture. We see it in the movies or on the television. The contemporary society doesn't value fidelity. If you get tired of your spouse, well, get rid of them and get another one.
That whole concept, it ties also to sacrifice, what it takes to stay in build that relationship, that giving of self. I mean, there was sacrifices for Mary along the way and for Joseph.
Absolutely. They had to sacrifice many things for the relationship that they shared, and obviously they had to do the same thing when they were raising Jesus as a child. But we see that in contemporary society also, and unfortunately there are many families that do sacrifice for their children. They sacrifice to make sure that their children get a good education. They sacrifice other things. I can again reflect on my own parents. While we were not in poverty, we certainly weren't rich. We did without a lot of things. When there were 5 of us children, a pot of beans. But you know, that was, I can only imagine when we have some cornbread and a pot of beans. Wow. But we were together. That was what my father and mother, that's what they held as most important, that all of us were together. And so we didn't eat out. We didn't have extravagant meals. We didn't have the best clothes. We didn't have designer clothes. We wore hand-me-downs, but we had clothes. We had food to eat. We had a roof over our heads. And most importantly, we had each other.
And I think that's such an important concept. I mean, I think that's what it's all about. And that's why the Holy Family, it's about that coming together and staying together.
Right, and still to this day, my brothers and sisters, while several of them are married and have children, we're still very close. We like to be together. We like to do things together. Whereas so many families are so scattered, they're divided for whatever reason. And that's sad to see families not be united, not being close to one another. So the Holy Family is a reminder that we are called to develop those relationships of siblings, relationships between parents, and of course parents, the relationship they share in marriage, because it's in the domestic church that we come to know love, We come to know the love that our parents and siblings have for us and for each other, but also we come to know the love God has for us in His Son, Jesus Christ. And it's where we come to know and to follow Jesus faithfully in our lives, to come to know the commandments. So family life, while there are many challenges to family life in our contemporary society, the church is always vigilant to protect families and to support families and to encourage families so that we can continue to be strong. Our families can be strong and come to know God's love for us in His Son, Jesus Christ.
Well, and I think because sometimes what we see happening in the secular world is because of the deterioration of families.
Right, and we can't help but be affected by these things because we live in the world, obviously. And so these things that are happening to families, especially in Western countries, it affects us too. But we have to resist the temptations that are out there to allow us to go in the direction that society is going in, but to be close to one another. And we do that primarily when we're united as the family of God, the church, and coming before the Lord Jesus and allowing Him to strengthen us, especially in the sacraments.
When it speaks so powerfully to family, because sometimes we could get discouraged and lose hope when we see all that's happening in the world, the violence, the wars, the economy. But we can't change the world, but we can make a change in our family.
We can strengthen our own family.
That gives us hope.
That gives us
that
hope.
If we focus on the family, if we focus on our children, that will make a huge difference in the greater world.
And I was very heartened not too long ago with one of my parishioners. The family invited me for dinner. And they have 4 children. And after dinner, they gathered everybody together before they sent them off to bed, and they prayed together. I thought, this is fantastic. No television, none to be found. They talked with one another, and in the prayer, each child had a role to contribute to the prayer before they went to bed. And I thought, now if we can encourage and continue to encourage all our families to continue down this path, this will strengthen the domestic church. And the love that they all shared for one another, what a reflection of the Holy Family. And the respect also that I saw in that family. Beautiful.
And that coming together. I mean, so many families pray the rosary together, and to find a family who also prays together before bedtime, that again strengthens the family. And
the old saying, I think, is very true. The family that prays together stays together.
So as we celebrate this Christmas season and reflect on the Feast of the Holy Family, what advice do you have for families in the world?
Well, I would encourage all families to be close to the church and make sure prayer is part of their daily living. I don't want to call it an activity. I would say it's part of your daily living is to share in prayer. All of the family come together and pray together because that's how we continue to develop those relationships, not only with ourselves, but with God. It's through prayer. And it is the Holy Family that we strive to emulate here on earth. So by encouraging families to pray and to, especially for parents, to help their children grow in love and respect.
Well, and that's where we learn some of our first prayers is from our parents.
Exactly.
So thank you for sharing that and reminding us of that need. And again, how beautiful that we have this feast day of the Holy Family to focus on what a model family looks like and reflect on our own families and say, what changes can I make so that, and what can we do differently? And
what things to avoid? How not to let the secular culture rule what we do, right. But let's be countercultural. Let's recapture the family life and help our families continue to grow in love.
Well, thank you, Father Greg, for joining us.
Oh, it's always a pleasure.
Sharing with us these important pieces to reflect on, because I think as we continue in this journey and even beyond the Christmas season, these feast days really provide us an opportunity to look at our own lives.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you. And thank you at home for joining us. On behalf of Shalom family, may we continue to reflect on our lives and enjoy this beautiful season of Christmas.